The sun hung low over the desert, casting long shadows across the U.S. operations base, a remote cluster of tents, bunkers, and mobile command units. Heat waves shimmered off the sand and metal alike, distorting vision, making the already tense atmosphere feel heavier. Inside the command tent, the air conditioning was on full blast, but the tension was palpable, almost suffocating. Soldiers shifted uneasily in their chairs, some fidgeting with maps or radios, others just staring at the floor, lost in thought. Outside, the hum of engines and occasional chatter of distant convoys reminded everyone that danger was never far. At the head of the room stood Major General Robert, a man whose face was weathered by decades of service but whose eyes still burned with intensity. He had called the meeting on short notice, and the subject was urgent, critical. A hostile convoy, heavily armed and strategically positioned, had taken control of a ridge 4,000 meters away, effectively out of reach of most conventional sniper teams. Intelligence reports suggested that if the convoy remained, Allied forces could suffer serious casualties. The general's team had already tried every tactical option available, yet failure lingered like a shadow over the base. He scanned the room. Veteran snipers, officers, and tactical experts sat stiffly in their chairs, notebooks and laser rangefinders in hand. One by one, the senior sharpshooters had already been briefed and had attempted their shots, and all 13 had failed. Some overshot, some underestimated, and the environment, a combination of desert heat, mirage, and unpredictable wind currents, had conspired against them. Morale had begun to sink with each miss. Finally, the general's voice cut through the low murmur of frustrated soldiers. "Any snipers?" The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the entire room go silent. Not one sound, not even the shuffling of papers, broke the tension. The question wasn't rhetorical, it was a lifeline. It implied urgently that if someone didn't act now, failure wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable. Eyes shifted nervously. Hands twitched near rifle grips. Veterans glanced at one another, some shrugging, some biting their lips. 13 failures had already proven the target nearly impossible. The general, his hands resting on the edge of the table, looked toward the back of the room. That was when he noticed her, Sergeant Ward. She sat almost unnoticed, far from the front, quiet, with a notebook open on her lap. Unlike the others, her hands didn't tremble. Her gaze was steady, analyzing the maps and monitors with a precision that seemed almost innate. No one had considered her a sniper. She had a background in logistics, responsible for equipment inventories, coordination, and maintaining the flow of supplies. Yet there was something in the way she studied the room, the target, and the failed attempts that caught the general's eye. She was calm, unfazed, observing with a quiet intensity that didn't demand attention but subtly commanded it. Some officers exchanged glances. "She's just a supply sergeant," one whispered under his breath. "She doesn't handle rifles beyond basic qualification," but didn't flinch or respond. She simply watched, calculating. In her mind, she was running through every environmental factor: wind at multiple elevations, mirage distortions, bullet drop over extreme distances, and the curvature of the Earth itself. Each failed shot became a lesson, each miss a puzzle piece in a grand equation. The room felt heavier with anticipation. Soldiers shifted nervously as if sensing something monumental about to occur. The general's eyes lingered on her a moment longer. The air was so thick that it almost felt solid. He cleared his throat, his voice a sharp command. "We can't afford another failure. Any volunteers?" At first, silence. Then, one by one, hands rose hesitantly among the senior sharpshooters, each one confident, each one experienced, but already aware of the limits they faced. The first to speak was Sergeant First Class, a grizzled veteran whose nickname was Hawkeye. His reputation for marksmanship preceded him. "Sir, I'll give it a shot," he said, voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. The attempt was meticulous. Calculations were double-checked, scope settings aligned. The target sat 4,000 meters away, a challenge unlike any they had faced before. The rifle cracked and the bullet arced through the desert air. Impact. A near miss, slightly left, slightly short. Frustration rippled through the observers, yet Hawkeye nodded grimly, acknowledging the difficulty. The second, third, fourth, each attempt failed. Wind patterns had shifted unpredictably, heat shimmer distorted vision, and even the best rifles couldn't account for every variable. By the time the 13th shooter had tried, the mood in the room had shifted from determination to disbelief. Soldiers whispered doubts, some shaking their heads. 4,000 meters was, for all practical purposes, an unreachable target. Through it all had been silent, not because she lacked interest but because she had been calculating. Every failure fed into her mental model. She noted minute changes in wind, the faint shimmer of heat waves, and the angle of the sun reflecting off distant metal. She could feel the rhythm of the desert, almost intuitively, the way a seasoned hunter might sense the approach of prey. Her experience, though hidden from her colleagues, had been forged over years of personal practice in secret, long-range shooting, and an upbringing where precision was more important than recognition. Finally, after the 13th miss, a hush fell over the room. The general ran a hand down his face, weary, exhaling through clenched teeth. The silence felt suffocating. Desperation lingered. No one expected a miracle. And then, almost quietly, a voice broke the tension. "Sir, I can try." Heads turned slowly. Some raised eyebrows. Others looked incredulous. All eyes settled on. She stood calm and composed, carrying no arrogance, no bravado, only certainty. The general's gaze sharpened, studying her. Could someone so quiet, so seemingly ordinary, accomplish what 13 of the best sharpshooters had failed to do? There was a pause, a breathless moment where the room held its collective heartbeat. She didn't wait for permission. She simply began to approach the firing position, methodical in every step. Every officer, every soldier sensed something shift in the air. The impossible had a new contender. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the tension surrounding her. She was quiet, but not timid. Observant, but not nervous. Her hands moved with deliberate care, adjusting equipment she barely seemed to touch, almost as if she was in her element. Yet she had never been recognized for this skill before. The general finally nodded, a mixture of skepticism and hope in his eyes. He spoke, voice low but commanding. "Do what you must, Sergeant, but know this, one shot only." Gave a small, respectful nod. No words, no promises, only the quiet determination that she had carried her entire life. She crouched into position, aligning herself with the target that had defeated 13 others. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the ridge, unaware that history was about to be made. In that brief moment, the base seemed suspended in time. Soldiers held their breath. Veterans leaned forward. The general's hand hovered near his hat, waiting. Every detail, the heat, the wind, the equipment, would now test her skill to its absolute limit. Yet in her eyes was a quiet certainty that even the impossible could be done. And in the back of the command tent, unseen by many, a quiet woman prepared to take a shot that no one would ever forget. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the base, a harsh, unforgiving expanse of sand, rocks, and heat that distorted both sight and sound. At the far edge of a distant ridge, barely visible even through high-powered scopes, the hostile convoy had parked itself in strategic positions. Armored vehicles glinted under the scorching sun, and the drivers were well-trained, moving with methodical caution, unaware that a life-or-death drama was unfolding nearly 4,000 meters away. Inside the command tent, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Each of the 13 veteran sharpshooters who had attempted the target before had failed, and the weight of their misses hung heavily in the air. Their failure wasn't from a lack of skill. The target's distance made the shot extraordinarily difficult. The curvature of the earth alone meant that even bullets fired from the most advanced rifles would arc significantly. Combine that with fluctuating wind layers at different elevations, mirage effects from the desert heat, and the minute motion of the moving vehicles, and the shot became nearly impossible. Sergeant First Class, nicknamed Hawkeye for his precision and years of battlefield experience, had been the first to attempt it. He had calculated wind speeds, adjusted his scope meticulously, and held his breath as he squeezed the trigger. The bullet left the barrel with a near-perfect arc, but it fell short. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, watching the target remain unharmed. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, and he shook his head, realizing just how far outside normal operational limits this shot was. Then came the second shooter. A specialist known for extreme long-range skills, he tried every adjustment he could imagine, compensating for heat distortion, adjusting for bullet drop, and even factoring in air density. But his shot landed a few meters to the right. Murmurs began spreading through the tent. Some soldiers whispered, "It can't be done." Others muttered prayers or curses under their breath. The general pinched the bridge of his nose, visibly tense. Every miss reminded him that the consequences of failure were dire. By the time the 5th, 6th, and 7th sharpshooters had tried, frustration began to build. The rifles were flawless, the shooters were the best the base had, yet the desert seemed to conspire against them. Dust shimmered in the heat, creating waves that bent light in unpredictable ways. Even the computers, feeding real-time data on wind patterns and humidity, could only approximate conditions. The ridge was nearly 4,000 meters away, over 2.5 miles, outside the effective range of most standard sniper rifles. Each miss gnawed at the confidence of the soldiers in the room. One by one, the remaining sharpshooters stepped forward, each bringing years of battlefield experience. They calibrated their rifles, double-checked the wind speeds, and adjusted for elevation. Some requested minor changes in position, believing that a few inches could make the difference. All shots failed. Some bullets overshot the target entirely. Others fell short by staggering distances. Soldiers began muttering about the impossible shot, some even laughing nervously at the futility of the task. The general's voice, usually calm and commanding, grew tight with frustration. "This is not a drill," he barked. "We cannot afford another miss. Every second counts. Get it right or we lose the advantage entirely." The tension in the tent ratcheted up another notch. Radios buzzed as spotters monitored every attempted shot, noting slight deviations. A whiteboard filled with equations and diagrams had scribbled notes of each failed attempt: wind direction, bullet drop, scope calibration, temperature. But the data alone could not guarantee success. Through it all, remained quiet, her eyes scanning the monitors, analyzing every shot, every miscalculation, every variable others had ignored. She noticed details no one else did. The subtle way the sun's heat bent light differently along one edge of the ridge, a shift in wind at higher altitude layers, even the way the sand beneath the vehicles slightly glinted and hinted at minor elevation changes that could affect the trajectory. Where others saw impossibility, she saw patterns, possibilities, and solutions hidden in plain sight. As the 13th shooter fired, a collective sigh filled the tent. The bullet soared, seeming to hang in the air for a moment, only to fall well short of the target. Soldiers groaned. Some leaned against tables, shaking their heads. Others sat frozen, staring at the monitor in disbelief. The general slammed his hand on the table, sending maps and notes scattering slightly. "Enough," he barked. "We need results. We don't have the luxury of failure." The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of equipment and the desert wind whispering outside. Every veteran sharpshooter had tried and failed. Some blamed the terrain. Some blamed the conditions. A few, quietly, blamed themselves. The impossibility of the shot seemed written in stone. Morale teetered on the edge of despair. It was in that silence, after 13 failures and hours of mounting tension, that finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost shy, but carried a calm authority that made everyone turn. "Sir," she said, "I can try." Heads whipped toward her. Some soldiers froze in disbelief. The general's gaze sharpened. "You?" he asked, incredulous. She nodded, composed, without hesitation. She was known for her meticulousness and precision in her logistics work, but few suspected that she had the skill, knowledge, or experience necessary for a shot of this magnitude. Her hands were steady, her eyes clear, her demeanor unshakable. Some officers whispered doubts among themselves. She's just a supply sergeant. She doesn't even fire beyond standard qualification, one said. Another shook his head. Are you sure, sir? Yet the general, despite his skepticism, saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't arrogance that drove her. Maybe it was preparation, analysis, and a hidden talent. Moved forward, her steps deliberate, almost measured as she approached the firing station. She carried nothing but her rifle, her calm, and a mind focused entirely on solving a problem that had defeated the best of the best. She crouched down, scanning the ridge, measuring distance, wind patterns, and light distortion in her mind. She had grown up learning the art of precision shooting from her father, mastering wind reading, bullet drop, and scope calibration before she even knew it would be useful in a battlefield scenario. Tragedy had once made her abandon rifles, but now the lives of countless soldiers depended on her skill. The general studied her silently, realizing that this unassuming woman might be the base's only chance to achieve what no one else could. The desert wind whispered past the tent flaps, carrying dust and tension alike. Soldiers held their breath, knowing that the next shot would either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. For a moment, the impossible seemed almost within reach. The room, the base, and the distant desert all seemed to pause in anticipation. And in the quietest corner of the command tent, a woman who had been overlooked, underestimated once again, prepared to confront the impossible target and prove that skill, patience, and focus could overcome any odds. The impossible target loomed, 4,000 meters away, waiting, and the quietest voice in the room had just volunteered to face it. Ward stood at the edge of the firing platform, her rifle slung carefully over her shoulder. The room had gone silent, the whispers of doubt and disbelief now replaced by a collective curiosity. Soldiers and officers alike studied her cautiously. Some leaned forward, as if their eyes alone could measure her competence. How could a logistics officer, someone whose official duties revolved around inventories and supply chains, possibly accomplish what 13 highly trained snipers had failed to achieve? The general, his brows furrowed, allowed her the floor but did not speak. This was uncharted territory. Her movements were deliberate, measured, and calm. Every action, from removing her rifle from its case to placing it on the rest, seemed purposeful. No tremor betrayed nervousness, no hesitation suggested fear. She had faced her own private battles long before arriving at this remote desert base, and the calm she exuded now was the product of experience, discipline, and a mind accustomed to extreme precision. While others saw her as quiet, almost invisible, she had always been observant, absorbing everything around her, noticing small patterns and inconsistencies that no one else would consider. The general finally spoke, his voice low and steady but tinged with disbelief. "Sergeant Ward, are you certain? You understand the range and the conditions. 4,000 meters is beyond normal engagement distance. There is no margin for error." She nodded without hesitation, her eyes locked on the distant ridge. "Yes, sir, I understand, but I've considered every variable. I only need a few adjustments to my equipment and I can make the shot." A murmur ran through the room. Adjustments? What kind of adjustments could possibly compensate for all the factors that had defeated 13 trained snipers? The general raised an eyebrow, skeptical. He had seen the best of the best fail repeatedly. Yet there was something in her calm and the precision of her voice that suggested she was not bluffing. Perhaps, he thought, this was more than just chance. It was preparation and skill honed in secrecy. Set her rifle on the rest, methodically calibrating it to account for the extreme distance. She requested a slightly heavier round, one that could counteract the slight wind shifts at higher altitudes. She adjusted her scope, factoring in the mirage that distorted vision along the ridge, and recalculated the trajectory using precise measurements of elevation and angle. Most importantly, She observed the ridge itself, noting subtle slopes and rises invisible to those who only glanced at it. Every failure she had witnessed from the previous 13 shooters informed her calculations. The general watched silently, impressed despite himself. Years of experience had taught him that when someone exuded such quiet confidence in the midst of impossible odds, it was either recklessness or brilliance. And in the case of Sergeant Ward, he suspected it might be the latter. As prepared, her mind drifted briefly to her past. She had grown up with a father who was a competitive long-range shooter. He had taught her to calculate wind layers, bullet drop, and the effects of temperature on ballistics before she could even tie her shoes. Every summer of her childhood had been spent on shooting ranges, learning patience and precision in a way that was far removed from the chaos of the battlefield. But tragedy had struck when a misfired shot resulted in consequences that haunted her for years. She had sworn off rifles, hiding her skill behind logistics reports and supply manifests, distancing herself from anything that reminded her of that moment. Yet here she was, summoned by necessity, driven by duty. Her private skills, once buried in shame and secrecy, were now the base's only hope. She set herself in position, the rifle an extension of her body, aligning herself with the distant ridge with meticulous care. Every breath, every heartbeat was deliberate. She adjusted the scope one final time, focusing on the distant target. Her finger hovered above the trigger, steady as stone. The soldiers around her watched with mixed emotions, skepticism, awe, and an unspoken hope. They had seen others fail. They had witnessed over a dozen experts attempt the impossible. And yet, here was someone who seemed to exude a quiet certainty that no one else possessed. She didn't boast, she didn't complain, she didn't seek attention. She simply prepared. Her calm presence had a subtle effect on the room. Veterans who had initially doubted her began to lean in, following her every move. They whispered observations to one another, noting the precision with which she handled her equipment. Even the general, who had commanded countless operations in hostile territories, allowed himself a quiet moment of curiosity. Could it be possible that someone so understated, so overlooked, could achieve what so many others had failed to accomplish? Checked the wind gauge one final time, noting the shifts in direction at different elevations. She accounted for the mirage caused by the desert heat, the curvature of the earth, and the slight tilt of the ridge itself. Every factor was meticulously calculated. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply prepared, letting experience, instinct, and precision guide her. As she lay prone, aligning her rifle with the distant target, time seemed to slow. Dust drifted lazily across the desert floor outside the tent, the sun casting long shadows across the ridge. Soldiers around her held their breath, the silence almost deafening. Even the hum of machinery and distant engines seemed muted in the presence of the impossible that now hung in the air. Focus was absolute. Every fiber of her being was tuned to this moment. She visualized the bullet's path, imagining its arc across the 4,000 meters, accounting for every variable she had calculated. Years of hidden skill, of careful observation, of private practice in distant shooting ranges had led her to this moment. She had anticipated this challenge, even if no one else had. The general broke the silence, his voice steady but tinged with awe. "Sergeant, you may proceed." Nodded, a faint smile barely touching her lips. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet confidence, honed through years of practice and observation. The soldiers watched intently as she took her position, each of them aware that what happened next could change the course of the mission. The room, filled with experienced snipers and tactical experts, had never felt so silent, so tense, so aware of a single individual's potential to alter the outcome of the entire operation. This was more than a demonstration of skill. It was a test of patience, precision, and nerves. And as steadied her breathing, adjusting the scope one final time, she became a symbol of quiet excellence. A reminder that sometimes the most unassuming individuals, the ones overlooked and underestimated, are capable of achieving the extraordinary. The room waited, the desert waited, the ridge waited, And the quiet woman who had spent years hiding her skill from the world was ready to face the impossible. Ward lay prone on the firing platform, the coarse desert sand pressing against her elbows and chest. She was calm, her breathing slow and deliberate, her eyes focused on the distant ridge where the armored convoy waited. Around her, the base was unusually quiet. Even the seasoned veterans, the ones who had attempted and failed 13 times before, now watched in awe, their whispers reduced to barely audible murmurs. Every second that passed heightened the tension. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. She adjusted the rifle meticulously. The bolt clicked softly as she chambered a round, heavier than usual, chosen to compensate for wind drift at extreme distances. The scope, a precision instrument that could magnify the target to seemingly impossible clarity, was carefully calibrated. Didn't merely adjust it for the horizontal plane. She considered the elevation, mirage distortion caused by the desert heat, and even the subtle difference in air density across the 4,000-meter stretch. Every factor mattered. Every detail could be the difference between success and failure. A veteran sniper beside her, one of the last men to have attempted the shot, leaned over slightly and whispered, "You really think you can do it?" Didn't respond, only tilted her scope slightly and checked the wind gauge once more. The answer was in her calculations, in the years of preparation that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. This was more than a shot. It was a methodical orchestration of physics, patience, and skill. The desert wind was fickle. On the ground it whispered softly, carrying the faint sound of distant engines. At higher elevations, it swirled unpredictably, shifting directions and speeds in ways that could easily alter the trajectory of a bullet traveling almost half a mile. Had studied the air currents through repeated observations, memorizing patterns and anticipating changes. She adjusted her aim slightly left, factoring in the projected drift. The other sharpshooters had underestimated this variable. They had relied on standard formulas and conventional calculations, but approached the challenge differently, blending knowledge with instinct honed over years. The sun, low on the horizon, cast long shadows over the ridge, creating visual distortions that could mislead even the most experienced marksman. Accounted for this. She measured angles between sunlit and shadowed areas, calculating the slight adjustments needed to compensate for optical illusions. Every previous failure she had observed now served as data points, pieces of a puzzle that she alone could solve. Where others saw impossibility, she saw patterns. Where others panicked at the challenge, she found clarity. She took her time. Each breath was measured, each movement deliberate. Patience was her ally. Unlike some who rushed under pressure, knew that the shot required more than courage, it demanded precision. Her finger hovered lightly on the trigger, steady. She tested the trigger pull, ensuring that no muscle twitch could alter the bullet's flight. The rifle was an extension of her body, a familiar instrument through which every calculation could be executed with near perfection. Her colleagues watched silently, unable to look away. They had prepared for months, trained for years, yet here was a single person, underestimated and quiet, approaching a task that had defeated them all. Soldiers whispered amongst themselves, sharing glances of disbelief and growing hope. Even the general, standing slightly apart, was silent. He could only watch as this seemingly unremarkable woman orchestrated what might become a historic shot. Recalibrated once more, adjusting for temperature and humidity, which could subtly affect the bullet's trajectory. She had learned to read these variables in her youth, observing her father make similar calculations with military-grade rifles. The lessons had stayed with her, embedded deep in muscle memory and instinct. What had once been a pastime now became critical preparation for a mission where lives depended on the outcome. She aligned herself carefully, shoulder pressing firmly against the rifle stock, cheek resting gently on the side. The rifle, steady and unwavering, became almost an extension of her body. The desert stretched ahead, shimmering in the heat, the distant ridge appearing impossibly far. The target was small, armored, and partially obscured by rocks and uneven terrain. Most would have called the shot hopeless. Most had been proven correct in their assumptions. but saw the opportunity where others had seen only obstacles. Time seemed to slow. The hum of equipment and distant vehicles faded into the background. Dust danced lazily in the afternoon sun. Soldiers held their breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Every observer, from the general to the youngest recruit, felt the tension crackling in the air. The impossible target had become the focus of all eyes, yet only one person truly understood the variables, the physics, and the rhythm needed to achieve success. Whispered softly under her breath, almost to herself, "Steady, steady, wind, elevation, arc." Her calculations had already been made, but verbalizing them helped reinforce the rhythm, the flow of the shot. Years of training, observation, and instinct had led to this precise alignment. She didn't hurry. She knew that haste could destroy everything. Precision demanded patience. She shifted her body slightly, feeling the subtle unevenness of the sand beneath her, adjusting her stance to ensure absolute stability. Her rifle rested perfectly, supported by the bipod, its weight distributed evenly across her shoulders. She breathed slowly, controlling the rise and fall of her chest, minimizing even the slightest motion that could interfere with the bullet's path. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity to those watching, she was ready. Every measurement had been checked and rechecked. The wind gauge had been read multiple times, and the scope's reticle had been calibrated to account for every known variable. The target, impossibly distant, was perfectly aligned within her sights. She exhaled slowly, maintaining her calm focus. The room seemed suspended in time. The general, standing silently, could almost hear the faint rhythm of her heartbeat. Every soldier, veteran or recruit, watched as the quietest person in the room prepared to attempt the impossible. And then, without hesitation, placed her finger lightly on the trigger, prepared to make history. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind, fickle and unpredictable, had softened, leaving the air heavy with anticipation. Inside the command tent, soldiers, veterans, and officers leaned forward, silent, their eyes locked on the prone figure of Sergeant Ward. She was still focused, her body an extension of her rifle. Years of meticulous training, observation, and hidden practice had led to this singular moment, the shot that could change the course of the mission, and perhaps history itself. Her finger hovered lightly on the trigger, each muscle relaxed yet controlled. She inhaled slowly, letting the rhythm of her breath synchronize with the desert around her. She imagined the bullet's path, visualizing the 4,000 meters it would travel, arching perfectly across the harsh expanse to reach the armored vehicle waiting on the ridge. Years of preparation, from childhood shooting ranges to silent afternoons spent recalculating wind drift and bullet drop, all converged in this instant. The soldiers around her watched in tense silence. They had witnessed 13 failures before, each one a testament to the target's impossibility. Some had muttered under their breath, whispering about the futility of trying. Yet calmness seemed to defy the odds. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her movements, only precision and unwavering focus. The room, normally bustling with chatter and nervous energy, was now suspended in anticipation. Even the general, whose voice rarely trembled, stood still, watching intently, as if the outcome of this single shot rested on the universe itself. Adjusted the scope one final time. The mirage of heat waves across the desert shimmered slightly, but she accounted for it with an almost imperceptible tilt of the scope. The wind gauge read a subtle shift, one that the previous 13 shooters had overlooked. She made a minor adjustment to the rifle's elevation, a fraction of a degree that could mean the difference between success and failure. Every movement was deliberate, every calculation precise. The rifle rested steady, an extension of her will, and the distant armored vehicle, the seemingly unreachable target, waited silently. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the stakes. Lives depended on this shot. The convoy could not be allowed to advance. Each failed attempt by the other shooters had bought time, but also frustration and exhaustion. Felt the weight of the moment, yet she did not panic. She relied on training, on instinct, on quiet confidence forged over years of hidden preparation. The room around her had ceased to exist in her mind. There was only the rifle, the wind, the target, and the path of the bullet. She whispered softly to herself, a mantra almost to steady her focus. Arc, wind, distance, steady, steady. The words had little meaning to anyone else, but for her they were a method of synchronizing her body, her mind, and her calculations. Each breath was controlled, each heartbeat measured. This was not a gamble. This was precision. This was mastery. The general's voice broke the silence, quiet but firm. "Sergeant, you may take the shot." Nodded slightly, giving no outward sign of nervousness. Her hand moved gently on the trigger, applying pressure gradually, deliberately. The sand beneath her arms shifted slightly, but her body remained steady, anchored to the earth like a practiced marksman's ritual. She exhaled slowly, allowing the muscles in her body to relax while maintaining perfect alignment with the target. Around her, the room remained tense. Some soldiers held their breath. Some leaned forward as if their proximity could somehow influence the outcome. Eyes flickered between her face, the scope, and the distant ridge, watching history unfold in real time. Veterans whispered among themselves, acknowledging the sheer audacity and courage it took to attempt a shot that so many before had failed at. Even the general, usually reserved, couldn't hide the anticipation etched across his face. Outside, the desert wind shifted again, a subtle gust brushing across the range. Had anticipated this possibility. She made a minor adjustment to compensate, the movement barely perceptible. Every detail mattered. One miscalculation, one moment of hesitation, could render all previous preparation meaningless. Her focus sharpened further, a laser-like precision cutting through doubt, fear, and distraction. Finally, after what felt like hours in suspended tension, she pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, a sharp, resonant sound that echoed across the desert like thunder, cutting through the silence that had engulfed the base. Dust rose from the firing platform, small grains bouncing across her arms, but her body remained steady. The bullet left the barrel in a perfect arc, soaring across the 4,000 meters of air, sand, and heat distortion toward the target that had every other shooter. The room was frozen. Soldiers, veterans, officers, and the general held their breath as the bullet began its seemingly impossible journey. Eyes tracked the distant ridge, straining to follow the flight of a projectile that seemed to float for an eternity in the shimmering desert heat. The silence was almost unbearable, each heartbeat echoing in the minds of those watching. No one dared move, speak, or even blink. Time itself seemed to slow. The desert stretched endlessly between the rifle and the target, the distance magnifying the tension in the room. Each second dragged like a lifetime. Soldiers whispered silent prayers, veterans clenched their fists, and the general's hand hovered near his face as if bracing for disappointment, but remained calm, her focus unwavering. She watched the scope, anticipating, calculating, feeling the rhythm of the wind and the arc of the bullet as though she could guide it by sheer concentration. Then the impossible happened. The bullet struck the target. The armored vehicle shuddered under the impact, metal groaning as it absorbed the force. Silence lasted for a heartbeat, then disbelief erupted into cheers. The general removed his cap, his jaw slack with astonishment. Soldiers jumped to their feet, clapping, shouting, some hugging one another in sheer exhilaration. The impossible had been achieved. 13 failures had preceded it, yet the quietest person in the room had accomplished what seemed beyond human capability. Remained prone, her expression calm, almost humble. She slowly removed her finger from the trigger and exhaled, the tension leaving her body in a quiet release. Around her, the base erupted with noise, celebration, and amazement. Yet she didn't seek recognition. She simply returned her rifle to its rest, adjusting it carefully, her mind already moving past the moment of triumph to the next necessary task. The general approached her, his steps quick but measured. He studied her quietly, admiration and respect etched into his weathered features. "Sergeant Ward," he said, his voice low and almost reverent, "that shot was beyond anything I have ever witnessed. You've just made history." Gave a small nod, offering no words of pride or self-congratulation. For her, it was never about accolades or recognition. It was about precision, skill, and duty. The mission had succeeded, and the lives of those depending on it had been protected. That was enough. Around her, soldiers and officers continued to cheer, but many could only whisper their astonishment. They had seen the impossible performed, the unattainable achieved, and the quietest member of their team had become the hero of the day. It was a moment that would be remembered, a lesson that courage, skill, and patience often came from the most unassuming places. In that suspended desert moment, lay prone, the rifle resting beside her, and allowed herself a single, quiet breath of relief. The impossible had been accomplished. The quiet woman had done what no one thought possible, and though the world outside might never know her name, those within the base would never forget the miracle that had unfolded before their eyes. The moment the bullet struck the target, time seemed to fracture across the base. The shuddering armored vehicle on the distant ridge became the symbol of an achievement that no one had believed possible. Soldiers and officers alike froze for a heartbeat, staring at the monitor in disbelief. The silence was deafening, a stunned pause that hung in the air like a held breath. Then reality settled, slowly but irreversibly, into astonishment. The general's hand came up to his face, brushing a bead of sweat from his brow, as though he could not believe the eyes before him. Years of experience, countless missions, and untold impossible scenarios had never prepared him for this. 13 trained sharpshooters had tried and failed. Yet this quiet woman, seemingly overlooked and underestimated, had done what they could not. She had pierced the impossible with precision, patience, and unparalleled skill. Around the command tent, chaos erupted in celebration. Soldiers jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering, some hugging one another in sheer relief and amazement. Veteran sharpshooters, the ones who had doubted, watched with mouths agape. They had spent years hunting skills, navigating impossible challenges, and yet here was a reminder that brilliance could emerge from unexpected quarters. Whispers traveled quickly. "Did you see that? She actually did it. I can't believe it." The general, his voice finally cutting through the excitement, addressed the room. "Everyone calm yourselves." His hands rose, commanding attention, yet even he struggled to maintain composure. "That shot, what we've just witnessed, is a first in military history. Sergeant Ward has achieved what was deemed impossible. Lives have been saved today because of her precision, patience, and skill." Soldiers and officers murmured agreement, their awe evident. Remained prone for a few moments, letting the adrenaline settle. Her breathing was steady, her posture relaxed yet controlled. She exhaled quietly, aware that the magnitude of what she had just accomplished might take hours to fully register with the others. Around her, veterans approached cautiously, offering nods of respect, small pats on the shoulder, even quiet words of admiration. They did not attempt to crowd her. They understood, instinctively, that this was a moment not for fanfare, but for acknowledgement of extraordinary skill. Spotters stationed along the ridge and in observation posts confirmed the impact. The data, previously recorded with painstaking attention to detail, showed the bullet's trajectory, its arc, and the precision of the strike. Every calculation had been perfect. The moment was not luck, it was mastery. The numbers, the physics, and the human skill had aligned in a way that few would ever witness in a lifetime. The veteran sharpshooters, the 13 who had failed before her, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. Sergeant First Class, Hawkeye, the first to attempt the shot, approached cautiously. His usual stoicism faltered slightly as he studied her, and he extended a hand. "Sergeant Ward," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like that. You just did the impossible." Nodded politely, accepting the acknowledgement but saying nothing. Words had never been her strength, and she preferred letting actions speak louder than accolades. The room continued to buzz with excitement and disbelief. Some soldiers still could not comprehend the sheer improbability of what had just happened. The desert itself seemed to settle into silence, as though acknowledging the precision and skill that had unfolded across its vast expanse. The general walked over, his gaze fixed firmly on. He spoke with a rare tone of admiration, one that carried the weight of decades of leadership and battlefield experience. "Sergeant Ward," he said, "that shot will be studied for years to come. Your calculation, your patience, your calm under pressure, it is beyond commendable. You've set a new standard for precision and courage." Simply nodded, acknowledging the praise with quiet dignity. Her focus was already moving beyond the moment. There was still work to be done, still vigilance required. Yet for a brief period, she allowed herself the satisfaction of knowing that she had succeeded where many had failed. She had proven that preparation, skill, and calm determination could overcome the impossible. News of her accomplishment spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had been on distant posts, unaware of the specifics, began to arrive, drawn by the commotion. They came with wide eyes and incredulous expressions, trying to piece together how a target at 4,000 meters had been struck with such precision. The story of her calm, meticulous approach and flawless execution began to circulate immediately. Some called it luck, but those who understood ballistics and sniper tactics recognized it as nothing short of a miracle. As the hours passed, the general convened a meeting to formally acknowledge success. He praised her strategy, her calculations, and her composure under pressure. Senior officers requested a debriefing, eager to study her method and understand how she had accomplished the impossible. Even the previously skeptical sharpshooters listened attentively, eager to learn from someone they had underestimated. Answered their questions concisely, providing insights into her thought process, her adjustments, and the critical details that made the shot successful. Yet despite the attention, she remained humble. There were no boasts, no demands for recognition. She spoke calmly, focusing on accuracy, preparation, and the importance of maintaining composure in life-or-death situations. Her quiet confidence and meticulous attention to detail left a lasting impression. Even the general, who had seen countless feats of bravery, could not conceal his admiration. By evening, the base had settled into a quieter celebration. Soldiers shared stories, recounted the moment the bullet struck the target, and expressed awe at the precision achieved. Quietly observed from a distance, content to let the story of her achievement grow organically. For her, the most important outcome was not recognition, but the knowledge that the mission had succeeded, lives had been protected, and the impossible had been achieved. The desert sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. The armored vehicle on the ridge, once a symbol of unreachable threat, now stood neutralized, a testament to the skill and calm determination of one quiet woman. The general watched her from a distance, understanding that history had just been made. He would ensure that her actions were documented, studied, and remembered, even if the world beyond the base remained unaware of the identity of the person who had accomplished the unimaginable. As night fell, the base hummed with quiet activity, soldiers returning to duties, communications running smoothly, and the desert wind whispering across the terrain. Returned her rifle to its case, meticulously cleaned it, and prepared her gear for the next day. There was no celebration for her in the traditional sense. Her satisfaction was internal, a quiet acknowledgement of a mission accomplished with precision, skill, and determination. The 4,000-meter shot had become legend by the time the sun fully set. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones, recounting the calm demeanor, precise calculations, and flawless execution of the quiet woman who had achieved the impossible. She had proven that heroism did not always come from loud declarations or bold actions. It often came from preparation, focus, and the unassuming confidence to perform under pressure when it mattered most. In that desert, under a sky turning from orange to deep indigo, Sergeant Ward walked among her comrades, unnoticed by some but revered by those who understood the magnitude of her achievement. The 4,000-meter shot was more than a tactical success. It was a lesson in patience, precision, and the quiet power of skill. And in the minds of those who had witnessed it, she would never be forgotten. The days following the historic shot were filled with a quiet, almost surreal energy at the base. Soldiers, veterans, and officers moved about their duties with renewed vigor, yet an unspoken buzz followed Ward wherever she went. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was a subtle recognition, the kind that comes when someone has accomplished something that surpasses ordinary human expectation. Even in casual conversations or routine briefings, her achievement was acknowledged in hushed, respectful tones. The 4,000-meter shot was now legend, and she, the quiet logistics officer turned hero, had become the focus of admiration and awe. Inside the command tent, the general sat reviewing the mission logs, the trajectory data, and the precise calculations that had allowed the shot to succeed. Each page was a testament not only to skill, but to the extraordinary patience and focus that had gone unnoticed until now. "Remarkable," he muttered under his breath, flipping through the reports. The notes from the previous 13 failed attempts painted a stark contrast, highlighting the extraordinary precision and mental acuity that had allowed one person to succeed where so many had faltered. Veteran sharpshooters who had been humbled by their failures now approached her with newfound respect. Sergeant First Class, Hawkeye, who had been the first to attempt the impossible shot, walked up quietly. There was a hint of reverence in his usually stoic demeanor. "Sergeant Ward," he said softly, "I've seen a lot in my career, but nothing like that. You've redefined what we thought possible. Teach me, teach us." His response was calm, almost understated. She nodded, offering guidance and insight without any sense of superiority. She explained her methodical approach, the calculations she had made for wind, elevation, mirage, and temperature. She spoke of her training from childhood, lessons from her father, and the quiet hours she had spent refining her skill in solitude. Her humility did not diminish the awe surrounding her. It enhanced it. The soldiers understood that true mastery did not require grand gestures, only focus, patience, and unwavering dedication. Outside the command tent, whispers spread like wildfire through the base. Recruits and seasoned soldiers alike shared their astonishment. "Did you see the shot?" one whispered. 4,000 meters, she actually did it." Another added, "I've been on long-range drills before, but nothing comes close to that. She's incredible." Even in casual mess hall conversations, her calm demeanor and extraordinary achievement became the centerpiece of discussion. The general, recognizing the historical significance of the event, called for a formal debriefing. He wanted every detail documented, the calculations, the environmental conditions, and mental preparation. For him, it was more than just a tactical success. It was a case study in extraordinary skill under extreme pressure. Her methods would become a blueprint for training future snipers and marksmen. She agreed, patiently walking through each step she had taken, ensuring that the information could be used to replicate success without diminishing the role of preparation, observation, and instinct. Yet even as recognition grew, remained quiet and composed. She did not bask in the attention. She did not seek accolades. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that the mission had succeeded and that her precision had saved lives. The roar of celebration around her was secondary to the internal acknowledgement that she had accomplished something extraordinary. To her, the result was tangible. The recognition was incidental. Late one evening, after the commotion had subsided, she walked alone along the perimeter of the base. The desert stretched endlessly, bathed in moonlight, shadows stretching like quiet witnesses to her achievement. She reflected on the journey that had led her here, from childhood lessons with her father to years of hidden practice, to a life of duty where skill often went unnoticed. And now, at last, that skill had found its moment. The wind whispered across the sand, carrying faint echoes of the base's activity. She allowed herself a small smile, a rare acknowledgement of the satisfaction coursing through her. She thought of the 13 failed attempts she had witnessed, the frustration and doubt that had filled the command tent. Those failures had taught her patience, humility, and the necessity of careful calculation. They had prepared her in ways no training manual could. And now she had demonstrated that even the impossible could be achieved with focus, precision, and determination. Word of her achievement eventually reached higher command, and officers from other bases expressed interest in learning her method. Reports circulated detailing her shot, analyzing the trajectory, and highlighting her preparation. Yet, the story that most captured attention was not just the technical aspect. It was the narrative of a quiet, unassuming woman who had redefined what was possible in the field. For many, she became a symbol of overlooked talent, the embodiment of the principle that true skill often resides in those who do not seek the spotlight. Her peers began to look at her differently. Conversations that had previously ignored her contributions now sought her insight. Her quiet suggestions carried weight, her observations were taken seriously, and her presence commanded respect without ever demanding it. She became a mentor, a guide, and an example, not just of sharpshooting excellence, but of patience, focus, and calm confidence under pressure. As days turned into weeks, the legend of the 4,000-meter shot grew. Stories circulated about the tension in the command tent, the series of failed attempts, and the calm precision of the woman who had succeeded. New recruits were inspired by the tale, veterans were humbled, and instructors used her approach as a teaching tool, demonstrating that extraordinary outcomes often come from meticulous preparation and quiet determination. Yet amidst the growing recognition, remained grounded. She continued her duties, assisting with logistics, coordinating supplies, and ensuring operations ran smoothly. Her extraordinary achievement had not changed her commitment to service. It had only enhanced her credibility. She carried herself with quiet dignity, aware that heroism was not about accolades, but about actions and results. In the evenings, she would sometimes walk alone, reflecting on the chain of events that had brought her to that moment. The desert, once just a backdrop to her service, had become a stage for her skills. The impossible target, once thought untouchable, had been struck not through recklessness, but through precision, patience, and focus. And in that quiet reflection, she understood the true nature of her accomplishment. It was a combination of skill, preparation, and the courage to act when the moment demanded it. The whispers of her legend continued to grow, even beyond the base. Stories of the quiet woman who had achieved the impossible traveled to other units, inspiring soldiers across different operations. She became a reminder that greatness is not always loud, that extraordinary achievements often come from those who work diligently, quietly, and without seeking recognition. Through it all, she remained humble. She understood that the mission, not personal glory, was the ultimate measure of success. And yet, she allowed herself the rare satisfaction of knowing that her focus, precision, and calm under pressure had made the impossible possible. In the quiet of the desert night, under a blanket of stars, Sergeant Ward walked among her comrades, unnoticed by some, revered by those who understood. The 4,000-meter shot had become a legend, and she had become a symbol of quiet excellence, a reminder that patience, skill, and determination often shine when least expected. Weeks turned into months, and the desert base slowly returned to its routine rhythm. The immediate chaos of the mission had passed, yet the legend of the 4,000-meter shot lingered in every corner. Soldiers, veterans, and officers carried stories of that day in hushed reverence. Every recounting emphasized not just the technical brilliance, but the calm determination of the woman who had achieved what no one else could. Sergeant Ward, once quiet and overlooked, had become a symbol, an embodiment of precision, patience, and courage. Her presence at the base shifted subtly. Where once she had been unnoticed, her opinions now carried weight. During planning meetings, officers and soldiers alike listened intently when she spoke, recognizing the mind that had redefined what was possible. She offered guidance on strategy, logistics, and long-range engagement tactics, drawing from the knowledge and skill that had allowed her to accomplish the impossible. She never demanded recognition, but it followed her anyway, like a shadow that acknowledged extraordinary talent. The general ensured that her achievement was officially documented. The trajectory, environmental calculations, and methods she used became part of the base's training protocol. Future sharpshooters studied her approach in detail, learning the importance of patience, careful observation, and precise calculation. It was a lesson in mastery that transcended ordinary instruction, how discipline, focus, and calm determination could turn the impossible into reality. Herself never sought the spotlight. She returned to her duties with quiet humility, handling logistics, coordinating supplies, and assisting with operational planning. Yet she carried the respect of her peers wherever she went. Young recruits would glance at her with curiosity, veterans with awe, and commanders with quiet admiration. She was no longer just a logistics officer. She was an example, a benchmark for excellence that could not be measured by rank alone. Outside the base, her story began to spread. Reports and anecdotes traveled through military channels, eventually reaching training facilities, academies, and tactical schools. The story of the 4,000-meter shot was analyzed in seminars and debriefings, often cited as a case study in precision marksmanship and decision-making under pressure. For soldiers in training, it became more than a technical lesson. It was a moral lesson. Greatness can emerge from quiet dedication, meticulous preparation, and the courage to act when the moment demands it. Reflections on the event were similarly insightful. She recognized that her success had not been a moment of luck, but the culmination of years of hidden skill, disciplined training, and patient observation. She thought back to the childhood lessons with her father, the hours spent practicing in solitude, and the setbacks that had shaped her character. Each experience, each disappointment, and each quiet moment of preparation had built the foundation for the shot that had made history. In private moments, she allowed herself brief satisfaction. She would walk alone along the desert perimeter, observing the endless horizon, recalling the trajectory calculations, the subtle wind shifts, and the mirage distortions she had accounted for. She would smile faintly, recognizing that the impossible had become possible because of preparation, skill, and a calm mind. Yet she never let pride overshadow duty. Her focus remained on the mission, on the soldiers she served with, and on the principles that guided her actions. The ripple effects of her achievement were profound. Other units began to reevaluate the role of overlooked talent, considering that quiet, methodical individuals might hold skills that surpassed conventional expectations. Officers became more attentive to hidden expertise, soldiers more aware of the value of patience and careful planning, and commanders more appreciative of calm composure under pressure. Shot had transcended its tactical significance. It had changed the culture of the base and influenced training and leadership philosophies far beyond its immediate impact. Years later, the story of the 4,000-meter shot continued to inspire. Young sharpshooters entering training would hear of a quiet woman who had achieved the impossible, and they would internalize the lesson that mastery often comes from diligence, observation, and unassuming confidence. Her example showed that recognition need not be loud to be enduring. It need not be sought to be powerful. Ward became synonymous with the principle that skill, patience, and focus could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Her personal legacy was equally profound. Soldiers who had served alongside her would speak of her calm guidance, her meticulous attention to detail, and her unwavering commitment to duty. Veterans often cited her example when training new recruits, recounting the story of the quiet hero who redefined what was possible with precision, patience, and courage. She had shown that extraordinary outcomes often emerge from those who remain unnoticed, working diligently behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to act. The general, reflecting on the event months later, would write in his report, "Sergeant Ward's achievement is a testament to the power of preparation, focus, and calm determination. She has demonstrated that heroism and excellence are not defined by rank or visibility, but by skill, patience, and courage. Her actions will serve as a benchmark for generations of soldiers to come." Even as accolades and recognition spread, continued to embody humility. She understood that the shot, while historic, was only part of her service. She continued her daily responsibilities, assisted with training, and ensured that operations ran smoothly. Yet, in quiet moments, she allowed herself the satisfaction of knowing that she had performed something truly extraordinary. She had redefined what was considered achievable, and in doing so, had inspired everyone around her to recognize that the impossible is only impossible until someone dares to achieve it. In the quiet of the desert under the endless sky, the legend of the 4,000-meter shot endured. Soldiers would tell the story for years, recounting the calm, deliberate precision of the woman who had faced the impossible and prevailed. Her name, once overlooked, became synonymous with skill, patience, and quiet excellence. And although she never sought the spotlight, her actions left an indelible mark on the military, on her peers, and on the generations that followed. Ward's story was not just about a single shot. It was about preparation, courage, and the enduring power of focus. It was a reminder that true heroism often comes from those who work diligently, quietly, and without expectation of recognition. Her 4,000-meter shot was a moment of perfection, yes, but more importantly, it was a testament to the potential that lies within every overlooked, unassuming individual. As the years passed, the story of Sergeant Ward became part of military lore, studied in classrooms, recounted in barracks, and honored in training manuals. Soldiers who had never met her personally still aspired to emulate her focus, precision, and calm under pressure. Her achievement became a timeless reminder that the quietest heroes often leave the most enduring legacies. And in the desert, under the vast sky, the story remained. A quiet woman once overlooked had faced the impossible and with patience, skill, and courage had made history.